Today, we're going to be color grading videos. Wait, something doesn't seem right. Much better. Hey, what's up guys? It's Emmanuel King, photographer and filmmaker based in Nigeria, and today we're going to be looking at an interesting topic, and that is color grading videos. When your camera records images, it uses what's called a camera profile to interpret them and store them on your camera. Hey, Future King here. If you want to skip all the technical stuff and get right into the tutorial, I've placed timestamps in the description and that should take you right where you need to be. When our traditional camera profiles collect info, they collect them linearly. And the issue with this is exposure is not a linear function, but rather an exponential one, as we know that it doubles or halves itself when it is increased or reduced. Now, the problem is most of these profiles already bake in the contrast, sharpness, and saturation, and that doesn't give us enough room to work in post. And the solution for this is what is called a flat or log profile. Now, the advantage of using a flat or log profile is the fact that we have much more dynamic range or much more detail in our shadows and highlights. The camera log profiles have a graph that raises the shadow detail while keeping all the highlights in check, and that's why it results in a desaturated, compressed, or flat look, if you may. That's why we need to convert our log footage into a more pleasing color space called Rec 709. Now, Rec 709 color space has been the TV standard for broadcast for quite some time now. And this is the color space that we're all used to seeing when the image is balanced. Hey, Future King here again. I forgot to mention, if your camera doesn't have a log profile, just like the camera I'm using to record this video, you can fake it by going to the camera menu, select a neutral picture profile, reduce the sharpening all the way to the end, take down the contrast also all the way, and the same for the saturation. This will give us a little bit of space to work in when editing the video. I'd also like to distinguish between the terms color correction and color grading. While the terms are often confused, color correction is simply balancing out your image to look like what you saw on the day you shot, which includes white balance and exposure adjustment. While color grading, on the other hand, is more of an art form that is used to limit the colors to a certain palette according to the vision of the director or the colorist. Now, in the process of color grading or color correction, we might use what is called lookup tables or LUTS. Lookup tables are mathematical equations that can convert a source image into a desired output image. Now, LUTS assists the color grading process, but today we're going to be learning how to color grade without the use of LUTS. One thing you need to be familiar with while color grading is the use of your scopes. Now, the scopes are visual monitors that help us to evaluate the luminance and chrominance of an image. In other words, the brightness and color of that image. We use scopes because our eyes and our monitors are not very reliable tools, and so the scopes give us an idea of what our image actually looks like. Now, there are so many visual scopes at our disposal, but today we're going to be taking note of only two, which are our IRE waveform and our vectroscope. Now, IRE is an acronym for Institute of Radio Engineers, which gives us info about our luminance or brightness. At the bottom of our waveform, we have the pure blacks, and at the top of the waveform, we have the pure whites or our broadcast white limit. In between, we have our shadows, midtones, and our highlights. Now, the vectroscope, on the other hand, is a color wheel that gives us information about the colors contained in our image. In our vectroscope, there's a line that tells us if our image is getting oversaturated, which is a 75% saturation mark, which is the limit for broadcast saturation. The vectroscope can also give us info about our white balance, because if the colors shift to either side of the vectroscope, that tells us our image is not properly balanced or one color is oversaturated. We also have our skin line, which tells us if our skin tones are balanced. Let's hop right into Premiere and see how this works. So now we're in Premiere Pro. I would like to show you what we're going to be coloring today. So this video is an excerpt of a documentary that I was part of creating earlier in the year. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, the first thing you need to do when you're in Premiere Pro is to make sure that your Lumetri scopes are available. Remember, we talked about scopes earlier, and we have the vectroscope and our waveforms. To access your scopes, go to Window and make sure that Lumetri scopes is checked. And to make sure that your vectroscope and waveform are present, you right click and you select Vectroscope YUV and Waveform RGB. I would like to clear all the effects I have on the video, and we just have our log profile. So This is an 8-bit file, and hopefully we'll be able to pull out as much detail as we can. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to apply the Lumetri color effect on the video. And we can do that by going to Effects and type in Lumetri color. Now in Premiere Pro, Lumetri color gives us an array of adjustments. We have the basic correction, which helps us vary our white balance and correct our exposure. And we have the creative panel, which has various creative effects that we can apply. More on this later. And of course, we have our curves. Our curves manipulate the various channels that make up our image. That is the red, green, and blue. And each time we erase each of the curve, we're going to be adding these colors. These 3 colors are called additive colors. And when we take away, we're going to be subtracting. So what you just need to remember is RGB CMY. That stands for red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. So basically what that means is if we raise our red curve, we're going to be adding red to our image. And if we lower our red curve, we're going to be adding cyan. Same thing goes for our green. If we raise the green up, we're going to be getting green into our image. And if we lower it, we're going to be getting magenta into the image. And of course, I'm sure you already guessed it. The blue curve, when you raise it, you get blue. And when you lower it, you get yellow. Now, there are different regions. From this point, we have the blacks. Here we have the shadows, the midtones, the highlights, and the whites. We also have saturation curves and our hue curves. I'll also discuss more of this later. And we also have our color wheels and match. Now, what the color wheels do for us is the color wheels help us to add secondary colors, that is colors that cannot be achieved by playing with our curves, into various sections of the image. So we already have our shadows, midtones, and highlights pointed out for us. And if we move these around, you can see that we are adding color casts to the image. Now we have all this knowledge, we can begin by correcting our image. We're going to go down to the color wheels and match panel, and we're going to go to the shadows. Because it's S-Log, like I said, the shadows are raised. We're going to pull down the shadows until it is almost touching our zero line. Somewhere there seems fine. We're going to pull up our midtones, and we're going to bring down our highlights as well. Somewhere around there seems fine for this image. The next thing we're going to do is go back to our curves, and we're going to go to the RGB section of our curve, which is a combination of all the curves, which is the one that is white. And we're just going to add a little contrast to the image without adding too many points. So what we're going to do, we take a point here, pull it down, and we take another point somewhere there, maybe here. So basically what we're doing is we're forming an S curve, but we're keeping it as smooth as possible. Now you see the way the waveform works, the waveform is representing the image from left to right. So we can have like a visual representation of everything in our image. Here you can see that the points are almost touching white, here and here, and that's because we have a very bright window here, and we also have a fluorescent light that is very bright. The next thing we're going to do is to add some saturation. So we go to our basic correction tab, and then would increase the saturation. About 150 of saturation for S-Log footage works for me. It might not be the same for you, and also you need to be paying attention to your vectorscope. You can see right now my yellow is already oversaturated, but we're going to correct most of that as we go on. So I'd like to bring down some of the highlights. I'm just going to recover most of the highlights in the image, and also like to crush my shadows just to add a bit more contrast. Maybe pick up my whites a bit, and I'm going to crush the black. So far we have been able to convert it from the log profile into a much more pleasing image that we can easily work on now. So this is where we were before, and this is where we are at the moment. So I'm going to create another instance of Lumetri color. So we could go to effects, double click Lumetri color, and we have another one added. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add a bit more contrast with my curves. I'm going to create 3 points, one in the shadow, one in the midtone, and one in the highlight. And now this is for this particular image just because I want a little more punch. So I'm going to be raising the midtone slightly, and we have much more contrast than we had before. Also here, I'm going to be correcting the skin tones. I talked about the skin line earlier. One way to correct your skin tones is to go to the opacity and create a mask. So let's select this ellipse mask. And what we're going to do is we're going to create the mask around the face. Yeah. Now what this does is to give us info about this selected area, which is our skin tone. And remember, I spoke about the skin line previously. Right here on our vectorscope, we have our skin line, and you can see that most of the skin tones are straying towards yellow. And what we want is we want most of the skin tones to lie right on the line. So what we're going to do, we're going to head to the hue versus hue curve, and I'm going to make a point here, and maybe here. We want most of these yellows to be moved to the red hue. So with those points selected, I would like to move this to the red hue. Yeah, somewhere there. So we can take off the mask and see our progress so far. So another thing I would like to correct is there's a greenish cast. I don't know if you can see it on your monitor, but if you look over these areas, you can see a greenish cast, and this is very common with Sony cameras. So I'm going to click here. Also, I'm going to move most of the greens towards the yellows. So we're just going to find the sweet point. Somewhere there seems nice. And for color correction, I think the final thing I'm going to do is the saturation of his sweater seems a bit much. As you can see, this line here, which is our 75% saturation line, is just touching it, and we just want to bring it down a bit. So we head into the HSL secondaries, and what we want to do is to isolate the sweater. So I'm going to set the color and click show mask so we see what we're doing. So what the HSL does is to isolate areas of the image via hue, saturation, and luminance. I'm going to maybe just keep the hues in check, expand the saturation range and the luminance as well. So you see we have a good selection. So it might not be entirely perfect. So we want to take most of the saturation of the jacket or the sweater. So first off, I would like to blur my selection so that we don't have like jagged edges, maybe denoise it a bit. We're also picking up some other stuff. We can also choose to mask just the sweater, but I don't think that's necessary for this particular example, because I would also like to desaturate the colors in the background, so I do not mind. So let's just select a saturation and just take it down a bit where it's not too noticeable. Yeah, that seems fair. And I think his jacket is also a bit bright, so we're going to darken the shadows a bit, maybe the midtones, just to show what we have done. This is before. Look how bright it was and how saturated, and now we've gotten most of that saturation under control. I think we can still take it down a notch, maybe 87.5. But that seems fine. We don't have anything oversaturated. All our colors are in check. We've corrected our greens. We have corrected our skin tones. You can see we've gotten most of those colors corrected. His sweater was appearing green before, and now I've gotten it to the right color. And this is where we started from. So I like to, just for organization's sake, I like to name each of them. So I'll call this S-log corrected, and I'll call this color adjustments. You can see that our waveform is almost filled up, and if it was in the S-log, you see everything is compressed or flat. The next thing we're going to do is to color grade. Now this is a very artistic process and it is highly subjective. The only thing I'll recommend is to keep your skin tones in check. We're going to head over to project, and we're going to click this little paper here that says new item, and we'll click on adjustment layer. Now we're going to drag that adjustment layer to our timeline. Now we're going to create another instance of Lumetri. We're going to head straight to the curves, and this time we're not correcting, we're trying to create a stylized look. So when it comes to this process, it's totally subjective and up to you what you actually want. So this is just me and my intuition and basically what I think works for me. What we're going for is this teal and orange moody look. Lucky for us, most of the colors that we're going to be working with are already in our scene. Like you can see his sweater is orange and you can see some blue books in the background. So this helps us. So I'm going to head to my blue curve and I'm going to add some blues to the highlights. I'm going to add some yellows to the midtones, and I'm going to add some yellows to the shadows, and I'll compensate by fading blues. Maybe bring this up a bit. For my red curve, I'm going to keep my highlight neutral, add some red to my midtones and some cyan to my shadows, just subtle, not so much. I'm gonna fade the curve as well. Let me bring up my shadows here a bit. Yeah, that seems nice. Maybe add some magenta to my highlights, just a bit. Keep my mids maybe fairly neutral or just a bit green. Maybe bring this back in. Add some magenta to the shadows. You can see by doing all these, we're adding a whole lot of contrast to our image. But that's exactly the effect or look I'm going for. And yeah, you can see we're already creating a very, very contrasty, punchy look. This is when we corrected our image, and this is where we are right now. I can still see some of that green cast that we talked about right under this place, but I think we can fix most of that. So I want to desaturate most of the greens, and this is the hue versus saturation curve. On my hue versus hue curve, I'm going to move most of the greens to yellows again. Make sure you don't move the other side of your curve because that's going to affect everything. For my blues, I'm going to move them to teal. You can see that's happening in the background. Maybe keep most of these in check. We've gotten a really nice grid already. You can see where we were before, where we are now. So I'm going to head to my secondaries and I'm going to select the skin tones and some other portions of the image. I'll click here. This is where most of the skin tones are. Show my mask. So we want a nice selection of most of the skin tones. Now I don't want it in the bright areas, so I'm going to take that away. So we'll go click invert mask. Now this selects everything other than our skin tones. So let's just refine this selection. And what I want is to make sure that our skin tones and certain portions of the image aren't selected. You just have to play around with this. And the next thing I'm going to do is to head into the color wheels here in the secondaries, and I'm going to add some teal. By the way, what the color wheels do is you can add secondary colors that are not within the range of your curves into your image. But now I've selected the skin tones away. That's by inverting a selection, we can add to every other portion of the image but our skin tones. So I'm going to add some teal to the shadows, just a bit, not so much, and maybe a bit to the midtones as well. The idea of doing this is just to add a bit of contrast to our image with color, because teal is the opposite color on the wheel to orange, so that way we have a nice color contrast going on. So I also like to still refine my selection and make sure that I'm not selecting things that I do not want to be selected. So we just play around with this a bit and just see how best we can get only what needs to be selected in the image and leave out most of our skin tones. So yeah, playing around with this would help. And you see, we've already gotten a very nice looking color grade. You can scrub through the footage. I forgot to mention, when you are coloring with the HSL secondaries, make sure you set a good amount of blur, else your image is going to be pixelated and also the effect might seem too strong or unnatural. For me, I'm going to be using 26 and that seems nice for me, and it still flows in most of the areas. Now this next step is very important to me. I like my blacks to always be black and my whites to always be white. And the way I ensure this is by going to my effects, create another instance of Lumetri, head to the curves, to the Luma versus saturation curve. And I'm going to create a point here towards the end of the curve and create another point towards the beginning. Now the idea is this region right here is mostly our shadows to black region, and this region is mostly our white to highlight region. Point right here is our point black, and at point black I do not want any colors to be in my blacks. So I'm going to click right here and desaturate. And what we're doing is we have a smooth curve. So as it goes from the blacks into the shadows, it's losing color from the black to the shadow. So that way we keep our image in check. That's the same for our whites. But one thing you need to know is Premiere Pro isn't exactly a color suite, but we can take advantage of what we have to get creative results. So just a reminder, this was how our video looked like from S-Log to when we converted it to Rec 709, and finally when we added the grade. So hopefully this improves our color correction and color grading skills. While color grading is much more extensive and there are a lot of techniques to be treated, I hope this video was able to cover most of it. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you really enjoyed it, I'd love if you hit the like button. If you thought it sucked, you could hit the dislike button. See you guys on the next video.